Hello and welcome to Whale Hunting, where we shine a light onto hidden worlds of money and power. I'm Bradley Hope, and this week we're talking about one of the world's richest, most politically powerful men, Elon Musk. I'm joined in the studio by Alexi Mostrous, partner and editor at Tortoise Media, and the reporter behind a fascinating investigation into Elon Musk's use of private intelligence, published originally as a 3-part podcast series called Elon Spies. Thanks for joining us, Alexi. Okay, so welcome, Alexi.
Thank you.
So we're going to talk all about Elon Musk and his private spies. But before that, I just kind of wanted to know how this came about in the first place. How did you kind of get onto this topic? Was there something that kind of led you here?
So, I guess in the past, I've done reporting around technology and the implications of technology and the people who run these big tech companies and have like unprecedented amounts of power, like national leader type powers. And I've also, a couple of years ago, did some reporting around private investigations agencies, in this case, primarily operating out of London. And what really interested me looking at that industry was that it was a kind of pretty unregulated world where behaviors took place like hacking and blagging that reminded me a lot of the stuff that the tabloid newspapers have been slammed for in like 2011, 2012, except in the case of the private investigations agencies, it was still happening. So when we got the chance to look at Musk and private investigations agencies, it was kind of this coming together of two types of story that I was already quite interested in.
And, I always found in the world of private investigation agencies, there's a huge spectrum. There's kind of on one end, the super, almost kind of boring box ticking kind of companies. On the other end are this kind of the Wild West of these agencies and stuff. Have you found that to be the case?
Yeah, totally. I think also that there are gradations within those categories. So I think you're completely right. There are some black sheep in the industry that like everyone knows about. And some of them, like Black Cube, right? And they tend to often be based in countries like Israel, or at least countries outside of the US and the UK. So you've got those categories of firms that are just kind of, they're all about one thing, and that's kind of very aggressive, like either counter surveillance or hacking for hire. On the other side of the scale, you're completely right. You have the kind of quite blue chip type firms, often employing people from quite privileged backgrounds that I've found. Like there's this one firm who I think is partly run by I think he's a lord or an earl or so. It's almost like this gentlemanly idea of like going and checking out, doing due diligence on behalf of corporates and things like. And they wouldn't even think about doing anything that the Black Cube guys do. But I think that there's also quite a few firms in the middle where it's a little bit like newspapers in the sense that like 90% of their work is kind of boring and vanilla and not controversial, but there's like sort of 10% of it where potentially kind of lines can be crossed and this gray area can take place where, for instance, you might not be breaking the law, but you might be doing something that most people would find to be unconscionable. Like, for instance, I don't know, blagging away into someone's house. Which happened in one of the stories that I was looking at. This private investigations agency was working for a law firm that was representing an oligarch that lived in London. The oligarch was being sued for a large sum of money, and he was telling the court that he didn't actually own this house on Eaton Square. And the private investigations agency employed someone to go around to the house with a big thing of flowers and an apron saying like flower delivery or something, blagged his way into the house, and then took photos of some documents on the desk of the guy that proved that he did actually own the property. That's that sort of thing I think happens more than people realize.
Yeah, I'm kind of impressed by that one. But in general though, there's, on the far bad side of the spectrum, there's things like hiring someone to hack somebody.
Yeah.
There's like following people, putting trackers on cars. What other kinds of crazy stuff have you seen in your kind of review of the industry?
I think that the hack and dump operations are probably like one of the most kind of controversial operations that happen, and they're increasingly common, and they are effectively when a private investigations firm, often through a number of different subcontractors, employs hackers to hack into the account of an opponent, get his private information, and then discover it somewhere on the open web or on the dark web in the weeks leading up to a court case. So the judge will often be in an incredibly difficult position because he or she will be faced with this evidence that is very detrimental to one party in the case, and he'll kind of know, the judge will kind of know that this evidence has not just been found on the dark, but because everyone has like a level of deniability, because there are so many kind of subcontracting stages between the hackers and the ultimate party, often in my experience of looking at some of these cases, they allow the evidence in.
Yeah.
Have you looked at the Neil Gerard case? That's
a sprawling, confusing one.
Yeah.
And I've been working myself a little bit on this one that relates to this Israeli hacker who's been arrested here in the UK called Amit Forlit.
Right. Yeah.
But I've heard of some other interesting ones. I once spoke to a kind of, I suppose they call themselves a dissident, but other people might call them like a Bernie Madoff figure, who was the vector of the hack was really interesting. It was called an evil twin. So there was a motorcycle parked in front of their very posh house.
Yeah.
And inside this motorcycle, he later learned, was a very powerful Wi-Fi router attached to a battery that had the exact same name as the one in the house.
Oh.
And because it was so powerful, it actually overpowered the house Wi-Fi.
Wow.
So then this person, whenever they were going on the internet, they started routing through the motorcycle. And so they called up the police and they came and they like figured it out, and they tracked that it was like a stolen motorcycle. Like it was really hard to figure out where it came from,
right.
you know? So there's a lot of these kind of like high-end techniques. I'm guessing probably that's mostly like government to government stuff, but every now and then with a very motivated oligarch or something, you never know, they might use these kind of tactics too.
I think that there is definitely that crossover into the private sector. Wait, the bike, right, though, how did they eventually discover that the Wi-Fi router was dodgy?
I think this bike didn't move. And I think the bike didn't move, and he was a high risk target kind of person. And so his own security were like, there's something about this bike, you know.
And then they found
maybe their mistake was not removing the bike faster, you know. But then again, maybe they didn't want to remove the bike because it would be risky to be seen removing the bike, you know. But I think, though, to be honest, most people on Earth are not, even in like high risk disputes, are not really getting targeted like this. That's more of an extreme side, you know. And like you said, I mean, it's interesting, these firms, because sometimes you wonder if they almost are like, let's just take an example, Christopher Steele. He was a former British spy who became a private operator. We've seen the dossier, you know. That is kind of like the nature of these reports, you know. It may be a little bit more innuendo than like, you know, bulletproof documents, you know?
Yeah.
And then they can always say, oh, it's intelligence, it's meant to be, you know, absorbed as such. But it does make you wonder if a lot of what's going on in the industry is implied or, you know, guesswork, you know?
Yeah. No, and I think that some of these reports, in the way that they're written, like, I think, didn't the Steele dossier, it had all the names were capitalized in the same way as like a CIA report would be produced, and it kind of, there's a kind of veneer, there's a structural like language that's used that lends credibility to it at first instance anyway. But
if there's one thing is true, is all billionaires have one private investigator or many that work for them, and they have many reasons, right? It could be personal, it can be business. So why don't you just kind of introduce Elon Musk as the hirer of private security?
Sure. Well, actually, you know, that point is a really good one, because it's something that we thought about, we tried to think about early on, which is like, okay, so you're interested in Elon Musk and private investigators, and okay, you've got evidence that he uses them. So what? All billionaires probably use some sort of private investigation at one point in their career. And so what makes Elon Musk different. It wasn't just that we had to show that he used them, it's that we had to show that he used them either disproportionately or even unlawfully. The reason why we first got into the story was because we were told about an example of him using private investigators in a way that wasn't necessarily either disproportionate or unlawful in isolation, but it just felt really weird. So my colleague Basha Cummings, who fronted this really great podcast called Walter's War in 2023, which was all the podcast was all about this guy called Oliver Lewis, who was the founder of and CEO of a defense company called Rebellion Defense. And the show was all about how Oliver Lewis had was a kind of Walter Mitty character, that he had told lies and in his private life, and what were the implications of that kind of web of lies for where he was now, which was in a kind of very powerful position. During the course of the investigation, Basha had been told that Oliver Lewis had been going out with an actor called Tallulah Riley. Tallulah Riley had previously been married to Elon Musk on 2 occasions. Like, they got married, they got divorced, they got married again, they got divorced, and then she started going out with Oliver Lewis in about 2017. Basha was told by a couple of sources that Oliver Lewis had broken up with Tallulah after Tallulah had received an investigations report from Elon Musk's private investigators, that Elon Musk had basically put his private investigators on Oliver Lewis. They'd uncovered some of the same sort of lies as Basha was uncovering in the podcast, had presented this to Tallulah, and that was the reason for the split. Now, at the time, Basha didn't put that in the show. It wasn't really that relevant. Plus, she didn't quite have the proof. After we started looking at it, we got more proof that this had happened. And it just kind of struck us as a bit like odd. It wasn't a private investigation that was looking into like a potential threat to Musk or like a kind of commercial dispute or anything like that. It felt quite personal and quite like, well, kind of on the edges. And it's like, if he was using it there, then like, what is the scope of his use of private investigators more generally? And then, of course, you get to Vernon Unsworth, and you're like, okay.
Could you introduce him a little bit?
Sure, of course. So Vernon Unsworth, like, if you wanted to like look at Elon Musk and his use of private investigators, you've got to start with Vernon Unsworth. He's a 60-something-year-old British guy who lives in Thailand, who splits his time between Thailand and the UK, and he's an expert cave diver. And he was part of a very small group of individuals who were at the center of a rescue of 12 Thai children and their football coach in 2018. I mean, it was a global story, so I think everybody kind of knows about it or will remember it. These boys got stuck in a cave in northern Thailand. The floodwaters prevented them from escaping. And effectively, it was a race against time to get them out because the oxygen was decreasing and their food supplies were running out. And meanwhile, all this rain was coming in and the water levels were rising. And Vernon Unsworth worked for 17 days straight with some other British expert divers to get these boys out. And the story of their rescue is unbelievable. Like, first of all, to find them in the first place. But then after they were found, then it was like, well, how do we get them out of 3 miles of partially submerged, pitch black cave systems? Like, a diver had already died because part of the reason was that he panicked too much. So they couldn't have the boys panic at all. And so the decision was made to inject them with ketamine and knock them out and then put breathing apparatus on them and then like pull them out one by one. And it worked. And so Vernon and the other rescuers at the end of this 18-day period, they were heroes, right? Totally rightly heroes. Like, that word is often overused, but in this case, it's appropriate. And then Elon Musk kind of into this very tense situation, he interjects himself because he's like, I've got this, I can build this submarine that can get these boys out. And he's on the other side of the world, and he's like, my engineers will design this mini submarine. And they built the submarine, and they, I think they expected, or Musk expected, praise. He expected like a pat on the back, and I kind of like, oh, you're so brilliant, such a genius. Oh, thank you so much. And instead, Vernon Unsworth went on TV, and he told CNN that the submarine idea was ridiculous, that it would never work, and that Elon Musk could stick it up his ass. Which maybe not like the sort of thing that you should say to like a thin-skinned billionaire, but nonetheless was what was said. And at that point, Musk retaliated and called Vernon Unsworth a pedo guy on Twitter. And the implications were, and he expressed this, expressly, that Unsworth was this like old British guy, and there was really only one reason why he would be living in Thailand. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. It's because he was a paedophile. All, by the way, totally untrue. But Musk kind of doesn't retract much of this. He doubles down on it, and he says to someone on Twitter a few weeks later, "Isn't it surprising that this guy hasn't sued me?" So he's not backing down. So eventually, Vernon Unsworth does sue, and the case kind of works its way into the US system. But unbeknownst to Vernon, before the court papers were filed, Elon Musk had agreed to pay a private investigator called James Howard Higgins to dig into Vernon's past. He paid him, or agreed to pay him, about $40,000 to put a team of investigators on Unsworth and to try and basically like establish that he was in fact a paedophile, reverse engineering Musk's original claim. This all came out in the court case. You can see emails from James Howard Higgins to Jared Birchall, who is a very important person in Musk's life. He's the head of Musk's foundations. He's one of the most powerful people in Musk's orbit. Jared Birchall was like, yeah, we need you to act aggressively, creatively, use whatever means necessary to prove, that this guy isn't who he says he is. Some of the techniques that James Howard Higgins was suggesting included bin spinning, which is kind of going through Unsworth's bins in the UK and in Thailand, a classic tabloid journalism practice, by the way. He suggested that his investigators would infiltrate Vernon's Facebook accounts, his partner's Facebook accounts. He had a Thai partner, his partner's mum's social media, all pretending to be someone else in order to extract information. He said he would pretend to be a charity worker in order to extract information on Unsworth, and all of which Birchall didn't say, hold on, that's controversial, or I don't know if you can do that. Birchall was just like, yeah, like, you use whatever, use your discretion, like go for it, basically. Anyway, the complicating factor in this whole thing is that James Howard Higgins wasn't who he said he was. He was a fraudster who had already defrauded hundreds of thousands of pounds from his company in Britain and had been sent to jail. But Birchall didn't do any due diligence, and him and Musk agreed to pay Howard Higgins to get information on Unsworth. So we don't know whether any of the techniques that Howard Higgins promised to use were actually used. It could have all just been lies. But the most important point, I think, for me, is that Musk and Birchall were seemingly willing to, were seemingly encouraging him to use these techniques, even though they potentially fall into this category I was talking about before, the disproportionate and or unlawful category.
In a way, what this really shows to me is that it almost reflects more about the personality of Elon Musk, right? I mean, obviously he's saying some random thing on Twitter rather than back down and say, sorry, I shouldn't have said that, or something like that. Instead, he's trying to find proof that what he said, what he guessed was true. And I think in a way, probably that's a big thing about this podcast, is it really just reflects his personality and perhaps other billionaire type people's concept of power. That if they want something to be true, they can try to make it true. And I think the other thing that strikes me very much about this, there is this kind of dual edge of this. There's journalists do something similar sometimes, and then there's private investigators. But in the case of the private investigators, there's no actual effort to find the truth in some cases, right? This isn't about truth finding. It's about confirming or validating a preconception or so I don't know. I think, what do you think this shows about Elon Musk, this kind of behavior?
He has like an engineering mindset that he thinks that every problem is just effectively an engineering problem to solve. But B, much more importantly, I think he believes that his success is dependent on him being able to construct his own reality and not to give in to the sort of obstacles, the sort of worldly obstacles that most other people have to navigate. He wants to kind of construct his own reality, and he feels that he's been proven over and over again that mindset has led to incredible successes, which is true. But I think that what's interesting psychologically about what he does with spies is that it shows like the flip side to this extraordinary intergalactic kind of ambition, which is that he wants to control everything. He doesn't want to be out of control of anything, and he doesn't think the same rules apply to him. And that's interesting as a kind of portrait of a billionaire generally, but it's especially interesting in terms of the portrait of Musk, given what he said about free speech and the free flow of information on X, because it puts that ideological principle in the context of his own commercial ambitions.
It brings him down to earth, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because I mean, here's a guy who's trying to colonize Mars and building rockets that are doing objectively amazing things, and then at the same time he's going after Vernon. But in Vernon, what happened to him in the end?
So it's a really sad story, because basically, if he had, I mean, this is speculation, but if Vernon had launched a defamation case against Musk in the UK, then in my mind, there's little doubt that he would have won. I mean, what Musk said about him was clearly defamatory, it was clearly untrue, and he didn't have a public interest defense. But because it would have been a very, very hard and long and expensive jurisdictional fight to get Musk into the UK courts, Vernon was advised to sue him in the US, and it's much, much, much more difficult to sue for defamation successfully in the US. And Musk was able to argue, mainly thanks to a very, very clever and aggressive lawyer called Alex Spiro, who he has employed on other cases since, that what he said to Vernon was just like basically boys banter. And, like you shouldn't be penalized for that sort of thing on social media. It was not helped by Vernon's legal team telling him to ask for like $150 million or something ridiculous. I can't remember the exact figure, but I think I spoke to someone that said that once that figure was mentioned, someone on the jury just like gasped, and it's kind of like classic case of overreach. Anyway, he lost the case in the US. And since then, pretty much every story that has come out about him, whether it's collecting his MBE from Buckingham Palace or what, has always been, first paragraph, this is what's happened to Vernon Unsworth, Mr. Unsworth, who was labeled a pedo guy by Elon Musk on Twitter, and like, So it's following him around, and it will continue to do so.
And he'll never decouple from that, that's for sure.
Totally.
That is a really sad story. Well, and it probably has a chilling effect on people telling billionaires to shove it in the future. But
right.
And then the other two examples that you go through in the podcast, like, what do you think that they reflect in terms of these different aspects of Elon Musk? This one kind of reflects, I guess, his temperamental, almost shallow, thin-skinned element. What about the other two?
I think the other two are kind of like variations on that theme. We focused on how he treated whistleblowers at Tesla and how he used private investigators to minimize the impact that he thought that they were having on the company. There was this guy called Martin Tripp who in 2018 started speaking to the press about what he saw as safety issues at a Tesla plant. Immediately there was this huge operation internally and externally against Tripp to find out who this guy was, what he'd been up to. And we found documents that suggested that, this operation in total cost, half $500,000, I think. Isn't much in the grand scheme of things for Elon Musk and his wealth, but if you're looking at it in terms of like it's quite a lot of money to spend. That's external investigators flying into the plant. That's 24-hour surveillance on the guy. That's potentially, allegedly, accessing his phones and his phone data in real time. So I think it also shows, the Martin Tripp case also shows that, Elon Musk, when he sets out to sort of punish someone or to kind of set them up as an example, he really follows through on that threat. So that was there was a whole sort of strand of reporting that we did around how Musk used private investigators in a kind of commercial context.
Yeah.
And then in the final episode, we looked at an allegation that he had used private investigators to put his former partner Amber Heard under surveillance, which was interesting for me because I just finished up reporting quite a lot about Amber Heard and her previous partner Johnny Depp for another podcast. So I was surprised to kind of get back on the phone to her.
Yeah, you're on the Amber Heard beat. Yeah. She's next time you call, she's gonna be very worried. She's like, "What could you possibly do now?"
What have I done? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But that was worrying as well because what does it say about someone if you're going out with someone, they fly across the other side of the world, you're a bit suspicious that they might be cheating on you, and you employ allegedly a team of private investigators to sort of follow her around 24 hours a day and then report back.
There's a technology aspect too, right? Like some of the equipment they were going to use and that sort of thing.
So what we were told is that this operation against Amber Heard involved infrared and drones, and it even apparently when she got on a flight, one of the investigators would buy a flight ticket to kind of get on with her. It seemed like it was pretty extensive. I should say that the details of any operation are still we have not got a clear picture of exactly what happened, and Musk has not commented, not responded to our questions.
So I guess the obvious question is, Elon Musk is now the unofficial vice president of the United States.
Right.
Obviously was, a huge supporter of Donald Trump and seems to be in all the pictures, including the family picture of the Trump family. Somehow he's in the picture as well.
Yeah.
What do you think this could mean going forward? I guess, do you think that maybe his perspective could somehow now have even more impact?
Yeah, I think I phoned up some of the experts that we'd spoken to for the first 3 episodes for a kind of bonus episode after the election. So we spoke to Lynette Lopez, who's followed Musk a lot for Business Insider, and Ryan Mack, a New York Times tech reporter who's just written a book on Musk, which is very good. And they both basically said that, in their opinion, Musk's position is pretty unprecedented in the sense that they can't think of another billionaire who has got this close to a president and who has such potential influence now over the exact same regulatory authorities that are tasked with providing oversight to his own companies. So
we'll just interrupt you briefly, but in the past, billionaires had the same influence, but they remained in the shadows,
right.
Like Rupert Murdoch or whatever, they like to kind of pull the strings. But in this case, you see the puppeteer and the puppet in the same, stage, so to speak.
But there's a question. Who's the puppeteer?
Yes. Who is the puppeteer? It's a good question.
What do you think?
I know I did hear from somebody recently who had spent some time at Mar-a-Lago who said that Trump is actually sick and tired of Elon Musk.
Yeah.
that he's just like, okay, when's he gonna leave? Like, it's fine that he came here, celebrated, but like now, can he go home now? I don't want him to be like moving into the White House. And it seems like Elon Musk is having just too much fun, being in the middle of the circus of it all.
He's like best, what's he called himself? First buddy or something like that?
Something very cringy. Yeah.
But he stands to, I mean, in all sorts of ways, he stands to benefit. I mean, it's interesting to look at what his motivation is, because I don't necessarily think it's, with any of these billionaires, really, it's about making money. And maybe for Musk, it's not even that much about power in the same way as it is for someone like Murdoch. I mean, a lot of it, weirdly and like really geekily, I think does actually come down to Mars and his desire to get to Mars.
Yeah, and he just needs the buy-in. I mean, he needs the buy-in and the budget.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that he has put himself now in a position where he has maximized his chances for something to happen. And
obviously Trump is looking for a legacy now. He can't win again, at least according to the current laws. but since he can't win again, then what's his achievement gonna be?
Yeah.
And if it's like solving Russia, Ukraine, that might be something that doesn't stand the test of time. But having a giant statue on Mars, the first statue of a human being on Mars, maybe that would work.
He would do that, wouldn't he? He'd actually do that.
No, he would love it, but maybe he would realize that might be pushing it in terms of saying he wants it. He'll make sure it's Elon's idea.
Yeah.
Wow. But it's interesting too, just going back to investigators briefly to kind of close, is in a funny way, I kind of like a lot of private investigators. There's something about them that is charismatic, because they're non-sanctimonious. They're not all out to save the world, but yet they really want to find out things, and they often want to find out things about bad people.
Yeah.
Right. But sometimes they're also opposed to journalism, or they try to impact it or influence it. So I was just going to share one small example of one time I got a call from a private investigator, and they were building on the fact that we had previously met, and they said, "Oh, I'm just doing some due diligence on this deal for my client." But as they were speaking and their questions started to come out, my blood went cold, because it was immediately apparent to me that they were only trying to find out who my source was on a recent story. And that was the pretext of the call. And so I'll say it publicly what I did, which if this person listens, they'll be in a lot of pain. But what I did was I said to them, I got off the phone, and then I said to them in a message, "You know what? I actually have more information I want to give you." So I said, "Come meet me at Borough Market, right around the corner." And I proceeded to tell them, like, "Listen, my sources," and I gave them the name of their client, just to really punish them so deeply, because then I wanted to see their face at that moment,
And what do they say?
No, they did a pretty good job. They sort of said, "Interesting. Okay, I'll write that down," and then never heard from them again. But there's a lot of funny stuff that's going on out there, and I think in some ways, private investigators, they often think they have something that's newsworthy, but it almost never is. I've very rarely seen a good story come out of that world.
How do you think? Do you have any advice for journalists who interact with private investigators?
I think you just have to keep your wits about you. It's kind of like a lot of the best sources in journalism are difficult in some way. They could be people who themselves are criminals, for example. They could be people that have secret agendas, but their volatility or their unreliability is also why they may give you something that somebody else might not give you. Like people are always thinking that the best source in the world is like an FBI agent or something, but FBI agents there's a lot on the line for them. Like they don't want to share anything with you, you know? So they're actually the worst sources. The best sources are kind of the ones on the edge a little bit. So, but I think my main advice is don't think that private investigators are a great source of stories, because usually, and it's not because of even malice, it's more that they usually have a very small target. They have a very small audience. And the idea that what their small client finds out is meaningful to a big client is very unlikely. Like you mentioned before, this ENRC sprawling case where every private investigator in the world got caught up in it in some way or another. Right. And if you were to try to actually summarize what that case is about, it would just be exhausting. It's no one actually cares. What became the story was all of this, this meta layer of how they were fighting against each other and stuff,
Yeah, that's very true. And you're totally right about the volatility. I mean, I think we might both know a person that works in this industry that is famously volatile.
Yeah, with another two-name company title that is just a madman. Yeah.
I remember just like having a really nice text message conversation with this person, and then like waking up in the morning to find everything had been deleted, and then just like a whole like line after line of the snake emoji.
That is funny. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. A good example of maybe not a great source, but
yeah.
Well, what about you? What's your advice about private investigators based on what you've seen firsthand out there?
No, I think what you said is very accurate. I also I think I don't see them as great sources, or to me they haven't been great sources, but I do see them as a great story. Like, still, I think their industry is a great story.
Maybe your next podcast. We'll be listening out. Thank you very much, Alexi.
Thank you so much.
That's it from Whale Hunting for this week. Thank you to Alexi for joining us. You can listen to Elon's Spies on the Tortoise app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also listen to Alexi's post-US election special, Elon, A Star is Born, by searching for the Slow Newscast. Thanks for listening.
Whale Hunting is a production of Project Brazen. It's hosted by me, Tom Wright, and Bradley Hope. It's produced by Megan Dean, Claire Urban, and Arnav Binaikia. At Project Brazen, Mariangel Gonzalez is our project manager, and Charlie Barlow is associate producer. Ryan Ho is the creative director, with additional design from Andrea Claridge.